Hello, this is Amanda Jean Reichert for LTMS 525 for the winter 2020 session, and this is the presentation on robotics and learning theories. In this presentation, we're going to talk about a couple of specific items. First, we're going to go over Piaget and his general beliefs in learning theories, Piaget's stages of cognitive development, his ideas on hands-on experiences, briefly mention social cognitive theory, and overall give all of these things in a context of robotics. Let's get started with this jolly old gentleman named Jean Piaget. I mean, look at that guy. Can't you just see him sitting in the park playing chess or feeding pigeons? While I'm sure he's had his share of strolls in the park, this man really changed things back in the 1920s. He, being from Switzerland, was a generally nice guy and was particularly curious about epistemology, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, or the origins of knowledge. He studied and wrote many papers, but is particularly famous for observing and noting how children learn from the world around them. In many of his studies, he was known for observing his own children learn and play. Piaget had many beliefs, but there is one in particular I'd like to begin with and will hopefully continue to ring true through the EdTech examples that are presented. Ormrod summarizes Piaget's ideas as the interaction with the physical environment is critical for learning and cognitive development. In essence, Piaget brought attention and meaning to children developing understandings through their interactions with the world around them. When babies pick things up or put them in their mouth, or when children drop items on the floor, these are all instances of learning and development, not just random happenstance. Now, this concept is something we're going to refer to and come back to as we discuss my EdTech example. However, I'd like to introduce you to the next item of Piaget's learning theories before I dive deep into robots. Piaget not only took the time to observe and pay attention to children, he set a new precedent in the field of child development. Piaget took the time to define certain developmental stages of children through adulthood that are still widely recognized today. If you're in the field of education, this is nothing you haven't seen or heard before. Piaget designed and defined 4 main stages of cognitive development. First, the sensory motor stage is for children ages birth to 2 years old. In this period of development, children are very stimuli-oriented and survival-based. Children in this age range do learn. They learn quite a lot, but it is largely through physical interaction, according to Piaget. Second, the pre-operational stage is for kids 2 to 6 or 7. Children begin to develop logic and reasoning here. Language is a huge part of this developmental stage, as well as egocentrism. If you think about it, children are largely self-centered, and this is due to many things, including their development. Third, concrete operation stage is for ages 6 through 11 or 12, is where I'd like to say kids start to put 2 and 2 together. Ormrod summarizes this as children acquire cognitive structures that enable them to reason in adult-like ways about concrete, reality-based situations. This is the stage of elementary-age children, and where a great deal of our EdTech conversation will be held. Fourth and finally, we have formal operations stage for everyone past the ages of 12. This is when kids, tweens, teens, and even adults can begin thinking abstractly and use some of those higher levels of thinking in multiple facets. Now, are all these stages set in stone? No. There are many cases where theorists have disagreed with Piaget. There is also the simple fact that all people are different and every child has their own path of development. But understanding these stages of child development offers us a great window into the instruction we provide and objectives we write and expectations we have for our children. It also gives us a great platform to choose educational technologies that provide students with real, concrete experiences that help them to make deeper, longer-lasting connections. This is where I'd like to introduce you to my EdTech choice for this presentation. There are many types of robots, and I will mention a few as we go, but this is my all-time favorite. This is the Hummingbird circuit board by BirdBrain Technologies, which is located out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So this is your regular circuit board. It's what's on the inside of your computer, the inside of your phone. But the difference here is that this is a much more user-friendly and interactive board that works well for kids, I'd say all the way from second up through adulthood. What's nice about the circuit board is, first, you can read it like a book, whatever you want to put in it. You read the spot where it goes, and that's all you need to know. From there, it has terminal ports, which are sort of like doors that you push the button, they open, you slide your wire inside of them, they close, and a connection or circuit is made. This allows it to be a very user-friendly item in comparison to other robotic circuit boards that are on the market. If you've heard of Raspberry Pi or Arduino, this is very similar, but it's just a lot friendlier to first, younger children, in especially the elementary ages, and people who have never used robotics before. So I'm a really huge fan of this for that particular reason. The circuit board you're seeing on the left is generation 2. It's called Hummingbird Duo. It has an Arduino heart inside that allows it to interact with things and think. And the circuit board you're seeing on the right is generation 3, the most recent version. It's called the Hummingbird Bit Controller, and it uses the microbit, which is a type of micro computer. It's basically a computer inside as the brain of the board, but the board allows you to interact with elements that are more physical, like lights, motor, sensors, and things along those lines. Another thing about the Hummingbird is that it is very friendly to all education backgrounds and technology. So first, you can use any type of coding with these boards. You can use block and text-based. Whatever you are currently familiar with, it probably works with this, including Snap, Scratch, Make Code, Python, Java. It all works with this board, as well as they're friendly to every single device. So you can use iOS iPads, you can use Mac devices, you can use Chromebooks, whatever you have, this device is friendly with it. So that makes it sort of an easy integrator to whatever you're currently doing or using. Now that we've taken a look at the actual piece of technology, to understand this process better, I'll start you off with the exact same question I ask all kids and teachers that I work with, and that is, what is a robot? And if you think to yourself for a moment and don't have all of these items on the screen, and I do this with students, I just show them the question and nothing else first, then I'm sure you conjure up all kinds of ideas. I know a lot of what students tell me is they'll describe this human type machine that does things that humans do, but it's a robot. A lot of adults will come up with examples like, oh, well, Siri's a robot, or robots are in factories or in machines. And to some extent, a lot of these things are correct, but robots really do 3 very specific things. First, they sense, they think, and then they act. If robots don't do all of these things, then they're not robots. So one of my famous examples is I tell kids, I ask them, have you ever walked into the Target and you pretend you're a Jedi and you use the Force to open the doors? And of course, kids always say absolutely, because who hasn't done that? And I, inform them, like, unfortunately, it's not the Force that's opening the doors. It's actually a robot. So there is a sensor at the top of that door. The sensor sees you coming. It thinks, or in this case processes, more of an adult version of this idea, about what to do, and it acts by opening the doors just in time as you walk through so that you can get to the dollar section in Target. These kinds of things are around us all over the place all the time. A really great example of where you find robots everywhere is in bathrooms. Now, why we put them in bathrooms, I think it's more obvious to us as adults than it is to kids, but there's automatic flushing toilets, the faucets that go on when you wave your hand, the dispensers for soap and for paper towels, and hand blowers. All of these things have sensors and have some sort of operations inside that think and then act. And they are all robots. I think that we know, I guess, in a sanitary perspective, why they're putting a lot of robots in the bathroom. But to kids, this is a very astonishing idea. Anything, however, that does not do all of these three things is not a robot. That's what we would call an animatronic or a puppet. It's simply something that does what you tell it to do, right? If I hit the letter A on my computer, the little A pops up on the screen. There's really not much to that. It's simply a process. It's simply a code that it just does what you tell it to do. However, if I for some reason had my computer was able to understand when I spoke to it, and it had to interpret my voice command, think about what I was asking it for, and respond in some sort of way by typing for me, by searching something on the internet or whatnot, then it would be considered a robot. Now, this is really important as we go through our conversation as well, because if we're looking at robotics as a way of understanding these instructional theories, the key here is the interaction. And the interaction comes from a sensor. So keep that in mind as we go along. Understanding that robotics are things we physically interact with is an important part of the equation that we're trying to talk about through this idea of learning theories. If you think about what we've learned so far about Piaget, the first thing we touched base on was that interacting with the physical environment is very critical to cognitive development. The next idea was the different stages of cognitive development, particularly concrete operational stage where kids are in the ages of 6 through 12. The concrete operational stage is exactly where students and when students should be interacting with a tool like the hummingbird. This tool allows me as an instructor to take abstract concepts like coding, angles, sequencing, and more, and make them concrete for students. Here, I'd like to highlight an instructional strategy that was born out of Piaget's theories. CPA is a common instructional method, particularly in math, but I'd like to think that it's very helpful in learning any concept. It is a widely used with elementary students who are ages 6 through 12 or 1st through 5th grade. Seeing that these students are in a hugely concrete developmental stage and can gain a great deal of understanding through interacting physically with what is around them, many teachers will begin with concrete or physical examples of concepts. In this image, they have math manipulatives as an example. Once students have demonstrated understanding in concrete with these manipulatives, they begin to represent the same ideas pictorially or by drawing pictures. And eventually, students will demonstrate what they know through abstract concepts like symbols, writing, numbers, formulas, and whatnot. Robotics plays a big part in this instructional method. Take a concept like drawing angles. An angle is an abstract idea of measurement. It is not a thing you can physically hold in your hand and interact with. This makes it a very hard concept to teach. And many teachers will use protractors as a concrete, but this tool is not physically demonstrating what an angle is. It is simply a way of creating a pictorial representation. Instead, I'll use robotics to have students build a protractor using a servo motor. They have to orient the motor correctly, helping solidify the concept of where 0 and 180 degrees is. Then they code the angles using a simple pattern block-based code, and they watch the angle happen, moving from 0 degrees to 90 or 45 or wherever else they decide. From there, they trace the angles that are created, instituting a pictorial, and then are asked to explain what they witnessed, allowing them to access those developing cognitive structures that allow them to reason in adult-like ways about concrete, reality-based situations, as Ormrod summarized for us before. I'm hoping that you're starting to get excited about the amazing things robotics can do for students in their development, but here we've only scratched the surface. Piaget not only had this idea about concrete, but he really believed in hands-on learning. Ormrod summarizes, children and adolescents can learn a great deal through hands-on experiences. Two major types of learning came out of this idea: discovery and inquiry-based learning. Discovery learning, as defined by Ormrod, should be largely a child-initiated and child-directed effort. And inquiry learning, as defined by Ormrod, typically has the goal of helping students acquire more effective reasoning in addition to acquiring new information. Robotics, particularly the hummingbird, helps me do this with students all the time. When I do my introductory lesson for hummingbird and robotics, I do not tell students what will happen, nor do I teach them how to code. I simply explain to them how to connect the device to the app. I give them a coding card resource. I give them a goal, and then I say, go for it. In this, students are guided towards certain objectives like making a light blink or a motor move, but the discovery of what happens when you put this pattern-based code together is all their own. This image is a great example of that aha moment when literally the light bulb went off for that student who coded this for the first time. Along the same lines, the hummingbird is a maker-based material. Used in makerspaces and classrooms worldwide, it's created with creativity in mind. Unlike other robotics like Sphero, Ozobot, or Dash and Dot, this means that this tool can be whatever you want it to be. If you want a robot animal, then you can create it. If you want it to be a lesson on comparing decimals, then it can be. Other robotics do not have the capability of being or doing anything, which limits their ability to make that concrete demands in an elementary classroom come to life. Because this presentation is meant to be approximately 10 slides and 20 minutes in content, I will be leaving you with only Piaget's perspectives. However, I do want you to think about robotics and know that it's not only developmental. There are so many ways that robotics can enhance student learning. One big example is through the perspectives and ideas of social cognitivism. Robotics is not a one-man job. It takes a team to make an amazing concrete example of our learning objectives. But that is where I'll leave you to ponder for tonight. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. All the images used in this presentation were either taken by myself, provided by a company with permission to use for education, cited directly from a source, taken from a pool of images labeled for reuse with modification, and so on. All sources are cited in the bibliography available on this slide deck, and the slide deck was a free resource from Slides Carnival.